it's all about the role of love in career development and relationships. And it's also, I think we're going to end on a really positive note because we're going to be talking about hope. And I guess, what brings us all together often with our working careers is that we want people to feel fulfilled and happy in their work. We want them to feel joy. And we know that relationships and connection, are really quite an important component of that. So we're going to start the seminar kicking off with Rosie Alexander. And I'm sure many of you know Rosie's work. She's quite a deep researcher. Rosie's working out of the Danish School of Education at the moment. So Rosie's going to kick us off and really talk about the role of love and relationships in how people make career transitions, young people particularly. So really interested to hear about that. Then I'm going to do a bit in the middle about, I guess, the power of relationships in the workplace itself. So when you're at work, what role do relationships play and how, as career practitioners and researchers, we can influence that and help people to nurture the right sort of relationships that help them thrive. And then Michelle is going to talk about hope and optimism and how that plays its part. So that's sort of the agenda. We're going to have 3 short inputs with questions at the end. And then by the end, we're also going to have some breakouts. So do stay to the end because then you'll get a chance to hang out with people who are on the call today. So I think that probably sets the scene enough. We are recording it, so you can obviously catch up with it later as well and see all the slides and so on. So I haven't looked in the chat yet. Have we got people far and wide? Sure we have. Yeah, looking forward to it. We've sort of been captured by the weather, haven't we, in the UK this week? So everyone's probably feeling a bit cold wherever you're dialing in from. So yeah, some people from Scotland as well. So welcome. So Rosie, are you ready to go and get your slides up? And then we look forward to hearing your contribution.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rosemary. I'm just going to see if I can share my slide. So that should be sharing on the screen. Can you see my slides on the screen?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. There we go. Yeah, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the role of relationships in graduate transitions. I'm not particularly well today, so I'm hoping that what I say is going to be coherent. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes and then have some time for some questions at the end. So the first thing to say is that where this work comes from for me is from my PhD. So some of you will know what my PhD was about, but my PhD looked at the career routes of young people from Orkney and Shetland, so the islands that are in the circle on this map here. And when I started my PhD, the focus was really how can we understand the relationship of place and mobility to career development. But as I'm going to show you, one of the things that really came out very strongly and quite early on was the role of relationships in that mix. So I think of career and relationship as 2 kind of key drivers which sort of interrelate, I guess, with spatial decision-making and migration. So I didn't start off thinking about relationships, but it came out as a major theme. Before I talk about the findings from my research, I want to start with a question really for the audience, for everybody who's here. I'm imagining that we have a mix of careers practitioners, maybe some people involved in planning, delivery of career services, maybe some people who are involved in research or policy and different kinds of roles. And I want to pose the question, how often do we take young people's relationships seriously in our work in career guidance? So how far do we think young people's relationships are valid, are important in decision making? How often do we take them seriously? And it's something that I have thought about a lot in my work, because I think when I was a practicing careers advisor, I was thinking about relationships and people around me were thinking about relationships in certain ways. So on the right-hand side here, there's a picture of a fence and the word love in the middle of it. And I think for me, I've included this image because I think often when we talk about young people's romantic relationships or relationships with friends at school, for example, we often talk about those as constraints. So, for example, a young person might make a similar decision to their friends, and we might talk about that as careers advisors as a limitation, or they shouldn't be so influenced by their friends, for example. Or we might have a young person who chooses to stay in the community that they grew up in order to stay with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And again, we might talk about that as a constraint, thinking that they should make a decision that's more independent, maybe. And the picture on the left-hand side here is of a parent and a child. And for me, sums up some of how we would talk about parental relationships, which is often in the way of the influence that parents have on young people, and the kind of careers information or career insight that parents offer, and the sense that that's often partial. So you see this in the labour market information literature, particularly, I think, where there's a sense that as careers practitioners, we make up a deficit in young people's information. So young people from certain backgrounds might not know very much about certain careers because of their family context, and we are making up for some kind of deficit in the information that young people have from their family. So when I think about these things, I think that when we think about young people, we often think about their career decisions as if they should be made by an independent person. So that's what this image is. Somebody who's freely moving, choosing their direction. They have their own aspirations, their own interests, and they are independent. And what I want to suggest is maybe going to trouble this a little bit. So in terms of the findings from my research, I'm going to talk about the importance of relationships to young people making transitions to university and from university, because that's what I looked at in my PhD. And I'm going to talk about the role of friends, family, and partners, and to think about the practical benefits of relationships, the value of relationships in terms of support, familiarity, and comfort, and the role of love. So firstly, support. This was a really big thing that came out of my research. So young people moving into university or moving into the graduate workplace after university often talked about these transitions as big, scary transitions, a big change, a lot of unfamiliarity, moving to a new place, meeting new people, engaging in something new, and that being quite daunting. And at these times, relationships with people were really important in terms of support, in terms of easing that transition, particularly familiar relationships which have a sort of sense of warmth or comfort in them. And I've put some examples there on the right-hand side of the page, or right-hand side of the slide, how this appears in the students' stories. So the first quote there is from somebody who is talking about moving away to an unfamiliar place, and they recognize somebody from their home place, and they sort of strike up a friendship, and it sort of connects them to home, and it helps them feel comfortable. The second quotation is from somebody who's talking about going away to university to the same city as their uncle, and how the uncle takes them out for dinner sometimes while they're at university. And what's interesting there, I think, is the role of food and home comforts, in inverted commas, which is often a phrase that young people are using. And the last one is really explicit about the value of home comforts. And this is a graduate who moved away for a graduate job, but moved with a partner. And I think it's a really lovely quotation that kind of sums up some of the value of a relationship for support. So they say that moving to a new place, it's really nice to have someone who knows you and cares about you, and where you can have a bit of a home. And that if they were moving away without that partner, it would be really hard. And I think what that graduate quotation is sort of indicating is that relationships are really valuable for helping, supporting in stressful times, and that without them, there's actually a risk that that transition might not be successful. So that they have a real value to young people. The second set of things that I wanted to talk about were practical benefits. And this is most clear, perhaps, at the point of graduation, and it won't come as a surprise to anyone in the audience, I don't think, that graduates often struggle to find work, or they might be in low-paid work or temporary work. So graduates in those kinds of situations particularly talk about the benefits of relationships in terms of accommodation. So either living with your family or living with your partner, and less often, but sometimes living with friends, is very helpful because it reduces the cost of the accommodation. So you can afford to be in a lower paid job. And it also creates a sort of safety net. It limits risk because somebody else is there with you covering the cost of the accommodation. So if you lose a job or you're only on a short-term contract, it doesn't matter quite so much. And the other ways that relationships are important for practical benefits, this was interesting to me because I'd never thought about it. We talk about networks as being really important in career development, for access to the labour market, for information and so on. But quite a number of students in this research talked about the use of their partners' networks, and potentially their friends' networks and their parents' networks as well. But the networks that other people have can help you to access work. So there are some quotes on that side, which I won't spend some time on, but they just show the value of relationships, both for costs of accommodation and for networks. And when I was thinking about the findings from my PhD, I thought, well, support is really important. And I think it was interesting to me, an interesting finding, how important the emotional support was from relationships. But it didn't quite capture the full breadth of why relationships are important, because young people are not just receiving support. It's not just a form of resource. They're also providing support, and they're also just in emotional connection with people. And those emotional connections are important. So this is where I start to think about love and the emotional side of relationships. And graduates talk very often about the importance of being with or being close to people who are important to them. And those could be partners or family, mostly partners or family. So I've got a little bit of feedback. Somebody's got their microphone on. If they could turn it off, that would be super helpful. Thank you. And what's interesting here for me as well is that some relationships you can manage over a distance. So people might be away from their family, but they might see their family quite a lot. If the family are mobile, they might speak to them on the phone. So they might not feel the need to be next to them or with them. But when other relationships, it is really important that young people are with or very close to those people. And this is particularly the case with young children, so nephews and nieces, particularly in this research, and older people, particularly people who are sick or very ill. So and there's two quotes there. So there's one at the top which just talks about how important it is to be close to friends and family generally, but especially in the case of nieces and nephews, so that because they don't want to miss out on growing up of their nieces and nephews. The next one is a quote from somebody who talks about the importance of being in the same place as their granny, because their granny is diagnosed with a terminal illness. There are 2 out of 22 students who are in this situation, so it's not unique. So yeah, a very much older person being close to them is really important. And the last quotation is from somebody who talks about the importance of being close to family when they have their own children, so an imagined time in the future. Also extremely common in this research, but it just shows how family dynamics are important, and they change over time, and they might change people's decisions about where they live, and that might change decisions about what people do. So this is a quote that I find myself thinking about quite often, that is from David Bluestein, that work and relational life are intertwined, yet not entirely congruent aspects of our lives. And I think when we think about ourselves, or certainly when I think about myself, I understand this. My career decisions are shaped by my relationships, by my partner, by my daughter, by my wider family. What I do is certainly, at least in part, dependent on them, what I feel is also good for them. And I think we understand this often in our work with adults, but what's interesting for me is that question about how far we think of this with young people, teenagers, older teenagers maybe, and graduates and students. And I think this is very important in my research. So I think about relationship and career as sort of intertwined dynamics that sort of shape the career decisions that people make and shape the spatial decisions that people make. So you might, sometimes your career might take you in one direction spatially, and your career might take you in one direction and your relationship might pull in the other. And at other times, they sort of align. So the way that the relationship dynamics and the career dynamics intertwine shapes how our futures develop, particularly develop over space. So these are some quotes that demonstrate the different ways in which career and relationship can be intertwined. The first quote there is from somebody who talks about being in the islands after graduation and looking for work. And then their friend is thinking about moving to Aberdeen. And the boyfriend is also in Aberdeen. And so what happens, and this phrasing is very interesting, the stars aligning. The stars sort of align so that the relationship dynamics, the friend and the boyfriend, and the career dynamics, looking for work, which is easier in a bigger labour market, sort of pull them to a certain spatial location. On the other hand, you get students where the dynamics are in conflict. So this student is talking about how on graduation, she was in a relationship that had been a distance relationship for some time, and that had been okay. That was negotiated as part of the partnership. But after graduation, they wanted to live together. And that meant that the student couldn't take on the masters that they would ideally have wanted to do because it was in a different place. And then the last example there is of an intertwining dynamics. So this is a graduate who moved back to the islands because that's where their partner was and didn't have a job. And it seemed to be in conflict with the desire to get a job. But then they do get a job in the islands and the partner loses their job. But then because the partner stays in the islands, because at that point, the graduate has a job in the islands. So the way that these kind of dynamics intertwine over time is really important. So I think that's probably about 15 minutes. So it's really just a taste, I think. That's what I've tried to give you, I've tried to make a provocation, a question about how often we think about relationships as valid and important for young people, and to give you a taste of some of the findings from my research. I would say my conclusions are that career is negotiated in relational contexts. And for young people, I would say relationships are a source of practical support, emotional support, and are important purely on a relational level as a loving relationships. So I would suggest that relationships are valid and important for young people, and paying attention to the relational components of transition can support young people. And I'll maybe finish by saying that I think it's a provocation for us to think about how far we talk about these things with young people and recognize the importance of relational context. It's also something that sometimes young people find difficult to talk about. So sometimes when people were talking about the importance of relationships in my research, they would say things like, I probably shouldn't say this, but actually my decisions have always been based on my partner. Mm-hmm. So a sense in which career decisions shouldn't be made in terms of relationships, but actually relationships are really important. So I'll leave it there, and if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to hear them.
Yeah, Rosie, maybe take the slides down. We can get the cameras on again. So there've been a few comments in the chat, Rosie, about this. I think Emma was saying about, there's almost this notion that if you stay at home and don't go to university, it's, you're less than. And
Yeah.
Leah mentioned, a comment about a friend who wanted to go went to a training partner with a friend and it's sort of being frowned upon. And then, Caroline made a point that as adults, we say to young people, well, of course you can be mobile, you can go anywhere, but actually as adults, we wouldn't do it. So, and then Emma's made a lot of points about costs, and actually there's a lot of benefits of not, being mobile and going off to university and being more located. But I'm sure there are some questions. Does anyone want to raise a hand or make a comment? Oh, Jilly, I can see you've
Yes.
got your hand up.
Sorry, yeah, my hand's going out.
Good, yeah.
It's perhaps an observation more than a question in a way, because I've had several clients who don't realize the importance of relationship and family. I had someone yesterday, actually, he was a radiologist and he had moved to Brighton, and he kept saying to me, that the job was brilliant. It was very competitive. He got it. He got the training number, but the relationship broke down very quickly. He'd moved there because his partner was there, and he was so lonely and so isolated to the point when he left. And he left a role that had been really good for him. And he said he hadn't realized at the time just the significance of having friends and family around. It wasn't just as relationship. So I think sometimes young people don't realize until it's too late.
That's a really good
Yeah,
point.
and it's interesting also what you're talking about there is presumably somebody who's older, and I think it probably points to a lot of the ways that we understand career often, and often our clients understand career as being something that should be made by us as individuals. A decision should be made by us as individuals, and we shouldn't be thinking about our relationships. But actually, if we step back and kind of look into our lives, then our relationships are really important in our lives and our well-being.
I suppose it's almost part of the system that we're operating in, isn't it? If you think of systems theory around careers, it's part of that picture, isn't it? Let's see. Anyone else want to make a comment or get on this topic is it close to your heart? Is something you want to offer up? Anyone else got something to raise? If you can raise your hand.
I wonder if there's a cultural element as well. It's Michelle speaking here, because I've worked with people from different cultures, and it's much more a community decision as to what they do post 16, post 18, and the type of work that they go into. And perhaps there's less of a sense of isolation, but because it conflicts with this Western concept that you make your own decisions, they can experience a sense of conflict. Should I be doing it this way? Should I take into account what my parents and family think? Or should I just do, is my wanting to do what they would like me to do, am I letting myself down?
That's an interesting point. Did everyone hear what Michelle was saying? You're a bit quiet, Michelle, actually. So Michelle was raising the thing about cultural context and cultural values having a factor for some people, and maybe sometimes there's a conflict there, or sometimes it's easier to make decisions because the culture and the family's unit is more important, perhaps.
One of the things that I think is important, but I haven't thought enough about to have a clear position on, is gender. So the way that women are often in caring roles or might adopt caring roles, for example. There is a very interesting sort of gendered pattern it's certainly in my research around out-migration and return migration, with young women more likely to move away, but then also to move back to be with partners. So there'll be so much to talk about around gender, but I do think there's probably something important there about the role of relationships in relation to gender and career decision making.
Thanks, Rosie. Leanne's made a point in the chat. Leanne, do you want to come off mute and just say a bit about that? If you can, Leanne.
Yes. Theory. No, it was about Gideon Al-Romani. I just remember that lovely quote, and I couldn't find the exact words, but we're not there to collude or to liberate. Do you mean so? But to help people examine the role of belonging and community and other people, and to watch our own constructs about individualism. So I know Michelle was talking about culture, and I remember that's where it came in, those cultural constructs, and to be very careful and just enable them to work out how much they want that to play a part in their decision making. So not to shy away from it either. And I know a key question advisors often ask is, who have you talked to, or who do you talk to about this, and not presume it's going to be family. You know, instead of just saying, maybe talk to your parents or your carers about this, it's like, no, keeping it very neutral, because it may not be them. It might be partner, friend.
Yeah, and I catch myself reflecting on how often young people talk to me about their partners when I was a career advisor, and actually I would say almost never, like in a school context. But what was interesting in this research is when I asked people retrospectively to talk about how they'd made their decisions, the role of partners even at school was very important. So it's a question, part of it's a question for me about how far we recognise and take seriously somebody's wider context, but also how often people bring that into the conversations that we have, and whether or not people feel that it's a valid topic of conversation. Because, for example, some of the young people in my research said things like, I shouldn't say this, but my decisions have been based on partners, you know. Yeah.
Rosie, maybe just Jane's got an interesting question. So Jane Artes, do you want to just put your question to Rosie, because she probably hasn't seen it in the chat? Are you there, Jane? Come off mute.
Hi, yes. I'm not quite sure whether you can see me or not. My laptop's been such a mess at the moment. I've been doing this on my phone for the first time, so apologies if it keeps coming and going. Rosie, I thought your comments were really, really interesting, and I just wondered if you found any differences between first and second generation HE participants, whether people who have a family background, for example, of HE had a similar or different approach to this matter. I don't know.
So I did think about this a little bit in my research, and I think the biggest difference is sort of structural in a way. So like people whose parents went to university often had the parents' generation were more dispersed because the parents' generation had been away to university and the parents' generation had moved around. So they were more likely to have like an uncle in a city over there and a cousin over here. And in a family where previous siblings, somebody's mentioned siblings, Fiona's mentioned siblings, where there are older siblings that have been to university or have gone away, then they might be going to university in the same town as their sibling, or at least near to their sibling. So I think it's more about how dispersed a family becomes. And when you think that higher education is a key way that families disperse and people disperse, if there's a tradition of higher education in the family, then it's more likely that the network will be dispersed and therefore make that kind of mobility a bit easier, potentially.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rosie. Rosie, there's a lot more comments in the chat coming up, but I think we maybe need, I'm chairing myself now, maybe need to move on to the next section of what we wanted to offer up today. And there will be time after we've had the breakouts later to carry on, you know, the different themes that we're touching on today. So now it's my turn to offer something up for everyone. So let me share my screen. Just bear with me. Yeah. Right, can you all see that?
Yeah, we can see that. That's great, Rosemary.
Super. So maybe someone else can keep an eye on the chat while I'm talking. So just for those of you who don't know me, my context where I work is mainly in organizations. So working with individuals who are navigating their careers, but also influencing the organizational culture around careers and the sort of processes and development that's available to people to have a thriving career. So that's a little bit about where I situate my work. And my topic is about, does everyone need a best friend at work? And what's the role of relationships when you're in the workplace? So it's a really interesting topic. But I wanted to start off a little bit by talking about, let me just get my slide, talking about some research I came across recently, because I think, as I said at the beginning, I think for many of us doing the work we do, we're really passionate, aren't we, about helping people thrive at work. And this piece of research I came across because I was actually doing a session for CIPD actually, which was about burnout. And this links back to our NICEC conference in the summer when we were looking at sustainable careers and wellness and all the rest of it. But this report's just come out, which really struck me as being quite significant about what works in the workplace to help people thrive. And this is a big piece of research that is based on the Indeed Work Wellbeing Survey. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but this survey looks at 4 measures of what boosts engagement, productivity, and all the lots of measures which say people are thriving at work. And the 4 areas it looks at are job satisfaction, that's linked to your work, purpose, happiness, self-reported happiness, and reverse coded stress, so the level at which you're not experiencing stress. And this was a very large sample size, and what they found from this data point is that organizations and cultures that create happier workers, more productive workers, perform very well in these areas. So it sort of is really making a very strong business case for creating an organizational culture and environment which really enables people to thrive, because it does so many things. And if you look at some of the conditions that help people thrive at work, it comes back to lots of research and different disciplines looking at this. It's not just career practitioners and career researchers, it's social scientists, organizational psychologists, which is a bit my background. And a big part of it are individual factors that impact on this: people's personality, people's sense of control, their values, what stage they're at demographically. We know about good work. I mean, Fiona Christie did a great session, I understand, last week about what makes good work, having decent work, having work that you can bring your skills to bear, not having role ambiguity, not having job insecurity. And then there's the environment in which people operate around transparency and all those things. But one of the big components is relational factors, positive relationships, teamwork. And that's why this idea of friendship at work comes into it. So I'm going to put a question to everyone. Would you say you have a best friend at work? And there is an emphasis there on best. I mean, because it reminds you when you're a child, isn't it? Who's your best friend? But do you have someone you work with where you feel the quality of that relationship is really important to you? There's someone that you turn to, you seek them out, they boost you. Do you have a best friend at work? And I don't know if people could put something in the chat to suggest that they have, and I'd be really curious about that. How many people do have a best friend at work? So you could just say yes or not. Yes. I call them a wife work. Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of you do have a best friend at work, it seems. I mean, maybe it's not one best friend, but lots of really good colleagues at work. So that sounds like we're a happy bunch. So this idea of having a best friend at work, it's something that's measured by, I don't know if any of you look at the Gallup Q12 survey. This is a survey that Gallup do every year across the globe, and it's made up of 12 questions, which is supposedly a great measure of engagement and satisfaction for people at work. And one of the questions is, do you have a best friend at work? And what they found consistently over quite a number of years is that people who answer yes are twice as likely to love their jobs, are more productive, more innovative, 7 times more engaged. But actually from their data, we're maybe a bit unusual in this group, only 2 out of 10 people say they have a best friend at work. And I think what's also interesting about this is apparently they took out the term best friend and the results changed. So there was something about the quality of that relationship that's really, really critical. And what that person is bringing you at work, whoever they are. And then the other point, as I mentioned there, about what a lot of people are starting to recognize is that with hybrid working and more remote working, it does seem like some people are feeling more lonely at work. And I think this is coming up a little bit as a challenge for young people entering the workplace who are transitioning, and sometimes they're going into a remote job and they're sitting at home trying to integrate into the workplace, and they're on their own in effect. So I think there is a big area there around how, you know, we build community, build belonging at work, and particularly for younger people coming in, transitioning, who don't have lots of relationships in the first place in the workplace. Maybe to the point you were just talking about, Rosie, you know, it's the same thing, isn't it? If relationships really matter to them in education as they're transitioning, when they get into the workplace, it's just the same, isn't it? How are they going to thrive, and they're entering a whole new environment as well. So that I think is quite interesting in itself about this. And this is a quote which is from a poem actually by David White, who writes a lot about friendship. And I think for me, this sort of it's very lyrical, but it's capturing this sort of sense of what friendship is about. It's that the person is seen by you, they see you, they see who you are, they recognize who you are, they don't judge you, and you see them. You know, there's that mutuality of it that's so powerful that you get from friendship. And it's quite sad that quite a lot of people don't have close friends actually, and are quite lonely. So friendship is it seems to be very important. So I think, you know, probably do need a friendship at work. So what does this mean for us as career practitioners? Well, one of the things that my organization's done a lot of work on is, like many of you have, is sort of thinking about, you know, what are the behaviors and practices that really help me thrive in my career? What do I need to do to enable myself to be self-driven and all the rest of it, but also to put in place the things that help me grow my career. And we've got these 7 dimensions of career health, if you like, and they're evidence-based. And one of them, as Rosie said, you know, told to build your network. But this is quite significant because when we did our own some independent research on this, we were correlating all of these 7 behaviors with career satisfaction, and that was then correlated with job satisfaction elsewhere. And build your network, again here, it really reinforces how much relationships at work are really critical to people's satisfaction. And the next slide just gives you an insight into some of the items that have influenced that the build onto the build your network. So it's people who give me advice and coaching, people who champion me, people who provide friendly support, people who help me to think differently, people give me feedback, people provide me with honest and candid feedback as well. So when I'm thinking about career development work with people, this is something we factor in. So if you're not, and we don't necessarily say find a best friend at work, but one of the ways that often talk about this is to help people think about, well, what kind of relationships do you need to try and nurture or seek out to help you and help you thrive. So that emotional bucket is really the place where the best friend at work would be. But it's also, you know, other people. It could be your manager. Your manager might be your best friend. It could be anyone. Those are the people who you turn to get that reassurance, that safe space, that honest opinion, perhaps. Really important. So we'd often sort of say to people, okay, how many people have you got in that bucket? Can you expand that bucket? And one way of expanding that is to, I guess, be more vulnerable, more open, disclose more. You get closer to people. You know, that does take a bit of time. Then there's the informational, which is also important because they're the people who maybe your go-to people for, I don't know how to do this. Can you give me the insights? I don't know how to find out about this. What other opportunities are there? How can I find out? You know, what career possibilities might there be for me? So they could be mentors, they could be your manager or anyone else in the workplace. And then the structural, which in career terms, many of you will be familiar with this. These are maybe the people who can advocate for you or champion you. And we know that some people don't have that sort of human capital and it's more difficult for them. But in an organizational setting, some organizations, employers are helping people to build that. And so they have sponsors and things like that. So there is a way, as for a career practitioner, I think, to try and cultivate and help people build more relationships, which might be very helpful to them. So that would be what I would offer up. And then finally, just to say a little bit about a bit of an organizational case study. So this is a business we've been working with, and colleagues who also do a lot of this work will have other examples, I'm sure. But this is a case of Red Hat, who've systematically gone about building a culture of career supporters. So they've focused on managers and manager conversations and support. They focus on mentors. They've got an infrastructure for mentors. They focused on building an in-house cadre of career coaches, or people who can provide some support, and also sponsors to tackle that structural side. And the other thing that organizations are often doing quite successfully, I think, with this is they create rituals. I came across this the other day. It was like they were doing every Thursday at 4 o'clock. It was Crisp Thursday. So everyone would everyone would get together at 4 o'clock to just convene and be together to build those sorts of relationships. So quite a lot can be done. So I'm going to stop there. I haven't been looking at the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. So anyone got any points I have not obviously seen that you want to raise, or questions or comments or things you want to build on that? Anyone? Kate, I see you've put quite a lot in there. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. I was just wondering if you'd seen that. It's both presentations have really resonated, but I was just thinking in particular of an organisation I'm working with at the moment, where I'm noticing a broader theme of loneliness, and it tends to be a culture where people are on the younger side. So I think there are issues about how people have been integrated into the organisation and maybe onboarded during COVID. I know, Claire, I think you made a point about that in the chat as well. But it just strikes me that people are really struggling to cultivate those skills. I shared something that really struck me was one young female coach. She said, but I do go to the office 1 day a week. They all go in 1 day a week, but I talk to nobody. I may as well be at home because I talk to nobody. I do my work and I go home again. And she was really lacking sort of, I suppose, some of the core skills of how to build those deep relationships. So I guess I was really heartened what you were saying, Rosemary, in your last slide about what can be done and the support in an organisation context that can be put around this, because I think there's such an importance to people's well-being at work that come from these relationships, whether they always need to be a best friend, but I think that it's having deeper relationships, and I'm noticing some of my clients have.
Indeed. And those social rituals, I think, have quite an important role to play. So seems like having regular touch points with people, because we're getting a bit too reliant on Slack or Teams chat messaging rather than actually talking. So any others? Michelle, you got your hand raised. Did you want to?
I just wondered, with the increasing use of social media, talking online, whether some people have lost the art of how to open a conversation with a stranger face to face, and perhaps it's the onus is on us as older workers, if we were in the office, to make a point of saying, how are you? How's your work going? Without being overbearing or intrusive.
I think you're right, Michelle, and I mean, good employers, I think, have good onboarding programs for people. Of course, if you're lucky enough to get on a graduate scheme, they do try and, I think, help people navigate their way through building relationships and how to just reach out and connect. But it's not easy, is it? It's easy enough to say. It's like you were saying, Rosie, about or someone was saying about just be mobile. It's not that easy, is it? Which is to just do it. And people do lack confidence. They feel they're an imposter in that situation as well, and don't know the etiquette of how things should be done. So that's a challenge for younger people coming into the workplace. But I think it is a bit of a concern that there is a lot of loneliness across the board. And I don't know if anyone else on the call has looked into that and has experienced that as an issue or seen research around that. Has anyone on the call seen that, or was it, Gilly?
Just, well, again, sort of relating to the work I'm doing with doctors, but I've been working with a GP practice, and it's potentially very lonely, isolating role being a GP, and one or two of the younger trainees particularly were feeling very isolated. And so the senior partner has simply implemented 10-minute tea break. Everybody puts that in the diaries every day, 11 till 11:10. It doesn't sound like much, but it's made a big difference to the younger trainees, because they know they can just talk to their colleagues for 10 minutes, in a very, very action-packed day when they're seeing 30 patients. It's just a small gesture, but it's made a big difference.
And does anyone want to offer anything up about how you, in your work, how you go about helping people build relationships? It's sort of almost part and parcel of what we might do in career development, but does anyone have any particular ways you go about it that you'd like to share?
So while people are thinking, I was going to say the converse with Gilly. I used to work in open plan as a team leader, and I made a point every morning around 11 of going to get a cup of coffee so they could have a good whinge without it being in my hearing.
It's funny actually, when you were talking, Rosie, it reminded me, I recently had a reunion with some of my uni friends from back in the day, which is a long time ago. And one of them reminded me of when I first met her. I actually said to her, apparently, well, I haven't really met any friends yet. I haven't got any friends yet. And she said, I'll be your friend. And that was it. We became friends, and we're still friends. So it's sort of, but that was me showing a bit of vulnerability, wasn't it? So sometimes if you show a bit of vulnerability, you start to get a bit closer to people, but it's not always easy, is it? Yeah. Wendy, yeah.
As you've said that, Rosemary, just to add to it, really, I was talking to a young woman just the other day who's now a postgraduate student, but she's been in employment for 7 to 8 years before going back into education. And we were comparing notes on how very transactional networking has become in some sectors. She had worked in consultancy, and she said, well, you invite people to go for a coffee, but you invite people for a coffee when you want something. And so one of the things I do talk to people about at any age, but perhaps particularly young people trying to break into work, is that you have to offer to give something as well as to get something, which is a bit like your vulnerability. It's a human exchange. And I know John Lees has written wonderfully about this, but I think sometimes we almost encourage people to think about networking as a transactional thing. And then you're doomed. Then you won't ever have a friend anywhere, as far as I know.
No, that's why I was putting that question out to everyone. How do we help others do this?
So that's my simplest tip, is if you want something, you have to offer something. You have to, there's a human aspect of relationships that they're not one way. You're not chatting people up just because you want work experience from them. And I think we don't, I'm sure good careers advisors talk a lot about this, but I think also there's the assumption that young people have nothing to give, whereas in fact they often have a lot to give as well as to ask for. So it's that reciprocity thing, I think.
Yeah, and it's so important, isn't it? And
close to your point.
Yeah, and I see this with my own son who's looking, he's actively looking at the moment. And I say to him, you could talk to the, and he's nervous about doing it because he doesn't feel he's got anything to give, and I say, look, people like to talk to young people. It energizes them, It's, yeah. Anyone else got a point to make? Amanda, is that your hand up?
It was, but I think Janet put hers up first, and I know Janet.
See, I'm confused with the hands coming up, whether it's a real hand or on the bottom. So, okay, Janet, and then you, Amanda. Yeah.
I was putting my hand up because I wanted to bring Amanda in.
Oh, thank you. Well, better still, Amanda. I didn't see your hand then, obviously waving.
Oh, I love everything that you've described about how you help people think about building a support network. And Janet will know that the work that I've been doing over the last 10 years with an academic colleague, Stella King, is built around a framework we call your personal boardroom, which sort of tackles different areas of people you go to because they add to some of the knowledge that you have about the world, the sort of informational roles. And again, you talk about kind of structural roles. We would talk about people who either unlock resource or influence on your behalf or sponsor or connect you. And then the developmental roles, people who challenge and provide improving advice, nerve-giving support anchors. That's the sort of network that we talk about. But I'm particularly interested in everything that you're discussing this evening about young people coming into the workplace now. So a lot of our work has been built around people who are, probably mid-career, and they already have a network. And what we do is help them identify or select people who can invite them to kind of continue to kind of grow and progress. But if you're coming in from the beginning, so I've been doing a couple of sort of focus groups really with people who probably only joined in the last sort of 12 months. And I just came off a call actually before this session right now. And interestingly, the two people, they're very much on the technical parts of their career. They're both kind of doing kind of machine learning and AI. And one of them has joined a hospital. And interestingly, her sort of anxiety in the workplace is not to do with asking people about how to do her job. That's quite straightforward. There's a whole blindness that she describes that she has about, I don't know what I don't know in a workplace environment. I don't know how to ask whether I can take time off or go on holiday, or there's a written set of rules in the workplace, and she feels they just haven't been written down anywhere. And so when I go into work, that's what makes me feel anxious. And it's probably not what all of us in the workplace would worry about, or would feel that if somebody did ask, that we couldn't provide very reassuring answers. But it was just that simple kind of, how does a workplace work? Which feels very basic, and maybe we make assumptions that people come in and they just sort of do that, and genuinely they don't. But the other thing was a very kind of go-ahead young man working in one of the big sort of tech firms at the moment. He described the onboarding process that he went through. He talked about being given a project to do for the first 2 months, and when they were given the project, that was an invitation really to go and ask anybody anything around the building to kind of help you with your project. So, but what he described was there was a sort of social norm at the beginning when you came in that you could go and talk to anybody. So he said, I organised 50 coffee chats with people where I just asked them about their work, and actually that was great fun to do. But a year later, he hasn't really followed up on that. It was like, once you're sort of into your work, that sort of social norm around, I'm new and I don't know anything, so can I have 10 minutes to talk to you, has disappeared. And now he's sort of back almost at the stage of feeling, if I do go and ask people to have coffees, that I feel somehow that I am being a bit instrumental. And so in a way, that freedom he had at the beginning has already gone.
I think we could probably talk a lot more about this actually, Amanda, but maybe we can pick this up towards the end in the plenary, because I'm really conscious now I'm behind time for Michelle, and Michelle's got a really important part to share as well. Maybe, Amanda, if we can hold that thought, because it's really, really important. But I want to make sure Michelle has her time to show your session about hope, and that's going to make us all feel really good, I think.
I hope so. I'm going to try sharing the screen. Hopefully you can
Thanks
see
for all
that.
those comments, Amanda. That was, I was aware of your personal boardroom tool as well, which is, it's really good. So thanks for reminding everyone about that.
Hey,
Right, Michelle.
Just see if I can add the chat to that. Good, wonderful. Right. This follows on beautifully from the from Rosemary and Rosie's presentations, because hope for me is often tied up in relationships, being able to identify allies and develop support networks that they've helped me through the hard times, and also those times of celebration. So I'm trying to see how I can change the slide to the next one. There we go. So I thought it would be just good if you could spend a moment thinking about what the word hope meant to you. I spoke to someone earlier in the day, and they just said, oh, is that an acronym? And I said, no, it's a word. So what does it mean to you? How does hope and talking about it make you feel? And I'm not talking about wishful thinking here. I'm talking about, hope, solid hope. So do you want to share some things in your the chat box, or if somebody can keep an eye on if anyone's putting up their hand if they want to make a comment? Okay, so we're getting there are possibilities. Yes, I think of hope with optimism. Yeah, that's a good one. The feeling that things can go well. There's light at the end of the tunnel. It's not an oncoming train. Yeah, it is a really important part of our career. I like that. The future might be a good place. How do we get there? Right, some really great thoughts there. Yes, very positive. So I found some. It says that concur with the sort of comments you've been making. What is hope? It's a belief that something good will happen to you. Two people who have written extensively about hope, this Spencer Niles and Charles Snyder. And Spencer said, having goals, having strategies for achieving those goals, that constitutes the essential components of hope. And hope is the belief that one can achieve these essential components. So those components being goals and strategies. And this thinking around it just reminded me of motivation. I felt that underlying hope was motivation. And that reminded me of Vroom's expectancy theory, which has three components. There's how much do I really want this? So is this something I'm hoping for, I want to happen, or I don't really care? But if it's something we want to happen, we also have to have an element of belief that if I put effort into it, it can happen. If I'm going to go and wait at the bus stop to go and catch a bus, I have to believe that a bus is going to come at some point. If I'm going to want to travel to a faraway distant country, I have to believe that that country exists. I'm not going to end up in a black hole. There really is a place called Thailand. But there's a third element. That instrumentality, and some of that is reliant on others. The belief that your effort and hard work will lead you to the desired outcome. So someone has to believe in you. Someone has to give you that bus ticket. Someone has to help you organise that holiday to Thailand. Someone has to show you how things work in this organisation. I love the Snoopy cartoon, but I would add that don't follow the action in it unless you've got the other person's full and informed consent, please. And I thought about, people who have inspired, people who have demonstrated hope. And recently I was listening to a documentary, I was watching it actually, about Linford Christie. Linford Christie, he was a Jamaican-born British former sprinter, and he's an athletics coach. He was the only British man to have won gold medals in the 100 metres at all 4 major competitions open to British athletes. That's the Olympic Games, World Championships, European Championships, and the Commonwealth Games. And he held those gold medals at the same time. Then, out of the blue, he tested positive for a banned stimulant in 1988. This was during the Seoul Olympics. And in 1999, he was suspended for 2 years after the banned substance nandrolone was found in a test. Although he'd been effectively retired for a couple of years. So the label cheat was given to him, and that was what he had to adjust to. So he continued as a coach, and later 2 of his charges, Darren Campbell and Catherine Murray, went on to win Olympic world medals. He never lost hope. and he never lost hope in the potential of others. So I love this quote that he said, if I can help someone realize their potential, then I'm a winner. I found that really encouraging because as a careers professional, I find that often the context changes, government policy changes, the priorities of the school change. There's a limited number of people that I can see, that I can work with, and yet if I can help one individual realize their potential, then I'm a winner. And I can never lose what I've done to cause that transformation. It can't be taken away from me. And that can also give me hope that I can make a difference to the lives of others, whether great or small. So I thought it would be useful just to take a moment to reflect on a significant time of change in your life, trying to recall some of the feelings at the time. How was it for you? And was this linked to hope or a lack of hope? And feel free to put your thoughts in the chat box. My chat box isn't changing, so I'm not sure if anyone's put anything in there or not. But that's fine, that's fine. Reading around the topic of hope, I was interested to read that our memories inform our present and shape our future, and recognising that the memories can be comforting, but it's also terrifying. Yeah, it is a big question. But perhaps one of the functions of memory is to serve hope. I know working with care leavers, I'd often say, can you think of something you've done that gave you a buzz? And what do we need to do to recreate that sense of buzz? And sometimes that was career ideas like, I enjoyed cooking. Or it could be, well, a time I spent doing X. So yeah, hope normally comes from connections with others. Yes, it does. So sometimes using those questions with other people, with clients, saying, recall a happy event. Who were you with? What were you doing? To locate that source of hope. And then thinking, well, how can we reignite that sense of hope? Engaging in that reappraisal and that reorientation. Sometimes using those CBT questions. Oh, it was all dreadful. Everything was awful. Nobody liked me. And then saying, all of it? Nobody? Well, maybe some of it was okay. I remember on this occasion, or that person. And then you can help build on that. Hopefully. Yes. Sometimes you need to focus on the current context. Yeah, what we can do, that one person that we can assist and not get bogged down with all the negativity that's going on around us. I mentioned Niles Spencer, Spencer Niles and Spencer Niles and others in this. So, Niles, Amundsen and Yoon, they came up with this hope action theory. It presents a theoretical structure that holds hope at the centre point of career development. And it has associated competencies. There's self-reflection, those moments when a person asks themselves about the bigger life issues, what really matters to them, takes you back to that room motivational theory. What really matters? What do they enjoy doing? What possibilities are open to them? What would they like to do, perhaps not with the rest of their life, but with the next stage? Self-clarity is getting to know oneself, an in-depth exploration of your skills, interests, values, personality. They're all central elements to those career conversations that we hold. And visioning, looking ahead at various possibilities, reimagining the future, and using that to create goals, and also, how are we going to get there? And moving forward, it takes a lot of energy and momentum. So it's always good to acknowledge that positive uncertainty. That can be critical. After all, things might not work out as planned, and be open to revising goals. So sometimes I've taken a client and we stood at one side of the room and said, look, things look pretty dire here. They look pretty hopeless, but we know where we want to go because you've told me about that. So moving across to the other room, this is the achievement. This is you having got your maths grade level 4. How does that feel? This is you having got the job of your dreams. How does that feel? And then walking back across the room and saying, right, now let's start thinking about how we move from here, this sense of hopelessness, to that position and that space over there where you felt a sense of success and achievement. So hope is essential for facing the uncertainties of the future. As support and encouragement, it needs to be ongoing as practitioners through a professional relationship. We try to assist our clients to develop that sense of hope. Having that sense of hope, it allows a person to consider the possibilities in any situation and propel them to take action. Hope with action. Sometimes it's the belief of the significant other that you can achieve these goals that constitutes the essential component in hope. I know that I would have never achieved my doctorate if my course director hadn't have expressed that belief in me. I think you're able to do a doctorate. Me? No one in my family had been to university. No one had achieved a master. Doctorate never occurred to me. It was because of their belief that I was able to take that step. So as career practitioners, while building relationships, we need to show the person matters, that they're significant. And that's often more than just saying it. It requires active listening, a dialogue that recognizes the challenges they're facing. You might want to talk with them, as I mentioned, about how they've overcome challenges in the past, what helped and what hindered. Sometimes it requires an expression of mattering through action. And I suggested the exercise where you walk them across the room. You can also do it with getting them to sit in different chairs, the chair of where they're at now and the chair representing where they want to be. And then through that conversation, you can help them determine what needs to be done to make that transition a reality in small, achievable steps. Supporting them to step back and think about what they want to do, what their strengths are, what they could do differently. Give them hope. And the quote from the slide is from a chap called Viktor Frankl, and this came up in his book, which is really good, about the Holocaust. And he was looking at why some people survived and what it was that enabled them to survive in the direst of circumstances. And it was finding purpose, belief, and hope. So if you truly want to give someone a chance, give them hope. It's within our grasp. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Very, very, very powerful words. I'm thinking there's a lot of comments in the chat, Michelle, you might not have seen, about the connection of hope being a feeling, of belief, the connection between hope and agency. Also concerns about young people having a lack of hope, I think, at the moment, all the pressures are under. So it's all very important stuff. And it seems to me the three things we've talked about tonight are all very connected, because relationships underpin a lot of support. How to get the support you need, how to build those relationships, and us practitioners, the way we can influence people's sense of hope and possibility. It's very powerful, I think. But any questions for Michelle? Then we're going to go into breakout. Well, why don't we just go into breakouts, and so people, you can all have a bit more of an intimate conversation about this and build some relationships, maybe even. So try not to disappear. If you can stay, would be good, because some now when you put people in breakouts and then they don't come back. So that's Jill's going to put everyone into breakouts, maybe 10 minutes, Jill. And in the breakouts, what we're suggesting, you can talk about what you like, of course, but maybe any things that's buzzing in your mind. What are you reflecting on right now? And you know, what you're left thinking about how you might incorporate some sort of focus around this in your own work, or whether it's prompted some new thoughts, or sharing what you're currently doing would be good. And then we'll have a plenary discussion as well.
Okay, I'm opening the rooms.
Back, everyone. You made it this far. Cool. So we've got 8 minutes left. So you know, a good bit of time for people to just maybe share anything that's on your mind. We had a great discussion in our group. So things that are bubbling to the surface that you want to take away and ponder on, or any more questions or any more sharing. So does anyone want to set us off and get some discussion going from any of the groups? Just put your hand up, or don't be shy.
You have lots of best
Laura, I'm
friends
going to
here.
put you on the spot, Laura, because you just were talking about something that was really interesting just then. So in our group.
I just got cut off, so maybe I'll finish here.
Yeah, finish that.
I was just saying that I was interested in the gender difference around this, for example, the stress response. So if people are talking about the benefit of having a friend at work, so you probably know that the typical response we all have to stress is fight, flight, freeze. So we can all, respond in different ways. But what happens with women is the female hormones kick in after that. And then we get a secondary response, which is tend and befriend. So we'll do the head count. How is everybody? Is everybody okay? And then we'll befriend somebody and talk about the experience or the stress that we're having. So that sharing moment over a glass of wine, which makes sense historically if we're all in a cave, we just share what's going on rather than run off and fight a monster or something. But I was just struck by, wouldn't it be amazing if everyone had that natural tendency? And certainly research I've been doing recently with midlife men as well as midlife women, I have felt more compassionate for some of the challenges that they face, as much as I'm normally working with women, that they don't have that natural necessity or just impetus sometimes. So yeah, I was just struck by, wouldn't it be amazing if that was as natural sometimes for them too?
That's really interesting, Laura, because there's been a lot on LinkedIn this week about, it was International Men's Day, wasn't it? One day this week, and lots of people were posting quite thoughtful things about men, weren't they? And suicide rates, and how men are struggling. A lot of men are struggling. So yeah, it's a really good point. Thank you, Laura. Emma, you've got your hand up, I see.
Thanks, Rosemary. I was just going to say, I just thinking on all the really, really interesting talks. I was just thinking about how much the big change that's happened in this sort of shift to remote working and being apart physically from people. It's just been such a big change, and it's become quite normal now, though. And it's just wondered how much that's disrupted everything in terms of people being able to feel like they belong and feel like they're able to connect with people. And yeah, it's just sort of thrown everything, all the things that we were used to, sort of thrown that away or changed everything, and we're still trying to understand how to navigate this new way of doing things.
No, I think you're right, Emma. I think the data's there to suggest that it's changed massively, and people's sense of belonging has gone down, and there's a lot of loneliness, and businesses and organizations that are trying to do something about that to create psychological safety, create belonging, creating opportunities. I mean, I've seen a lot of businesses now, organizations doing things like careers weeks, events, lunch, you know, they're trying to bring people together. But yeah, it's a problem, I think. Anyone else got anything to add on that, or comments or things to share? So Kate, you got your hand up, yeah?
I think it was just a reflection from our room about how much we've all got from this session, and maybe we weren't quite sure when we first saw the title, although reading the content had really helped. But it was something about actually this topic between us all, getting this kind of topic out to the people we're supporting, the organisations, the schools, the universities, could be really helpful in itself. The content that's been shared tonight, if we can sort of spark a wider dialogue, you know, that was something that really struck us in that room. So that was just all I wanted to say. It's I think it's struck a lot of people quite deeply tonight. So thank you.
Can I come in on that, Kate? Because in our group we were talking about the fact that our experiences have been very different, and therefore there might be an expectation that young people wouldn't need particularly that support, and that we need to really understand and grasp that context and that degree of change, and not just the employers building the support in, as you've been characterizing, Rosemary, but career leaders in schools, and you know, discussing with parents quite what a changed world it is, and I don't know, validating that need to build in that support and emotional connection, and not generalizing about moving away to university being the right thing to do. I've not said that very clearly. It was much better explained by Caroline in our group. So I just didn't want to lose it, Caroline, but you.
Oh, shall I just, no, I think with just something that I'd been reflecting on was very much that universities now are staffed by people who had a very, very different experience, when the idea was that the expectation really was that you went as far away from home as you possibly could to get away from your parents, you know, but money just wasn't an issue in the same way as it is now. And also at a time when going to university meant that you were much, much more likely to get a job, because you know, fewer people went. And I think obviously, you know, the experience now of young people at university or not at university is so different. And I think we, the older generation, need to kind of catch up with that, because I think we sort of know it, but we probably don't quite feel it, you know, as much as we could.
I just noticed your comment, Leanne, in the chat, which maybe isn't a hopeful one, about AI coaching.
Oh, it is hopeful, actually.
Is it? Oh, tell us more then, what you're thinking.
I just remember reading, you know, about the importance of relationship for the brain in terms of learning and growing. And I wonder how much of that is sensory. You feel a real human being cares.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And will AI, regardless if it's nice, almost, I hear what you're saying, or coaching responses.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't feel like a real human being. And ever. This is territory for us to claim, I think.
Yeah.
Very, very important, the whole well-being territory, to say we can have a big
I think, I misunderstood what you were saying there. So absolutely. And the thing I was thinking about the other day is, how many of you go to festivals, music festivals? And when you go to my experience of a music festival, it's the happiest place to go. Everyone's sleeping on the floor in tents, not the mucky, they're enjoying the music, the vibration of the music, and they're coming together with people. And I think festivals are one of the happiest things to go to, in my experience. And I just wonder what, you know, if you think about what that is, obviously for some people it'd be a nightmare, but, you know, my experience, I like it. I don't know if any of you else have had that experience of festivals, but apart from the mud. But I think we maybe run out of time. Sorry about me going on about festivals, but there's certainly, whenever I go to a festival, I come away feeling happy. I think we have run out of time. Claire, do you want to say anything about the next seminar before we sign off?
Yes, that would be great. And a huge thanks to you, Rosemary, for stepping into chair, and to Rosie for struggling on, and to Michelle as well, because you were both under the weather. But as Kate's just said, it's been a hugely positive evening and very thought-provoking. And the next seminar will be on January the 27th. So the details are up on the NICEC website, and that will be delivered by Kate and Gilly, who might still be in the room. Yes, you are. So we look forward to that on career coaching tools and theoretical underpinning to that. So thanks very much for tonight, and hope to see many of us together in January as well.
Best everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget to
Brilliant
see your little
session.
boy, Melody. Our little-
Sorry.
Oh no.
Bye everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a lovely
Was that a
evening.